Are we good? Oh. Yeah. Good morning. I'd like to call this roundtable to order. Today is Wednesday, November 29th. The time is 10:41 a.m. I am at-large Councilmember Christina Henderson, Chair of the Committee on Health. Today, we will hear testimony from José McDonald Morales, who has been nominated by the mayor to the Food Policy Council. We will then hear testimony from Caroline Howe on her appointment as the DC Food Policy Director. We're also going to do something a little bit different, but we're going to do a little performance update for the Food Policy Council for fiscal year 2023 and fiscal year 24 to date. This is a hybrid hearing. Mr. Morales is going to testify virtually, and Ms. Howe will testify in person before the committee. I wanted to note that our original hearing notice included several health licensing board nominees scheduled to testify today, and those nominees did appear on the notice, but the executive has either withdrawn their nominations or they're no longer available to present their testimony to the committee in person. So the Food Policy Council, is that you? Oh, okay. The Food Policy Council is the mayoral board that advises the food policy director, district agencies, and the mayor and the council on policies to strengthen the DC's food health system, including increasing access to healthy food and improving the local supply chain. PR 25-399 nominates José McDonald Morales as a public member of the Food Policy Council. Mr. Morales is currently the vice president of sales for DC and Northern Virginia for Keeney Produce Company, where he manages operations, strategy, and distribution in the DC metro market. Through Keeney's executive leadership development program, Mr. Morales has moved up through the organization since he started as a customer care representative in 2012. He has experience in local food systems and also includes serving on the board of Fresh Farm, the largest farmers market organization in the district. He also works or has worked at several farmers market and local food companies in California. Mr. Morales has a bachelor's in integrative biology from UC Berkeley, and he is a Ward 5 resident. I don't see any of my colleagues who have joined us. We do have one public witness who signed up today, but I don't see him either. Oh, he's still here. Great. So we're going to call Mr. Gallagher, who's the executive director of the DC Dental Society. I know, Mr. Gallagher, you were planning to present testimony on the dentistry nominees. However, we don't have any today. So I can still hear your testimony, but you could tell us how you want to proceed. Mr. Gallagher?
Good morning, Chairperson Henderson. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I understand my testimony might be a little unusual. I did want to address the nominations of the 3 appointments or reappointments to the Board of Dentistry. And really, I'm calling upon this committee to seek clarification from MODA regarding the process of nominating candidates. There are several DC Dental Society members who have practiced in DC for decades or years, have deep roots in the community. They've applied for seats over the past year, and they were never contacted by MODA. So this is just a little bit confounding that they haven't even been given the courtesy of an interview just to explore their credentials and their connection to the community. We have no specific objections to the 3 nominees who will be taken up by the committee today, Dr. Bailey, Dr. Morton, and Ms. Diane Smith. However, what is missing from the Board of Dentistry's composition right now is the perspective of an actively practicing dentist who is serving the DC community. 3 of the 4 dentists on the board, my understanding, are retired or fully retired. There's one who is practicing, but whose practice is in Southern Maryland, about 30 miles from the Wilson Building. And so what's missing is really the perspective of what's happening in DC, what the conditions are for the public, what the challenges are for running a dental practice. And those are perspectives that those who've applied would bring to the board if they were appointed. There are also 2 members who applied last year, one of whom was nominated and whose nomination was withdrawn. I met with that doctor recently, Dr. Amani Lewis, and he wasn't even aware that his nomination has been withdrawn. So really taking a look at what's happening inside MODA and understanding its process, I think is really critical for transparency and the sake of good governance. And lastly, I would just like to get clarity around, so what's happening with board terms? Looking at the MOTA website, the three appointments who are up for consideration by this committee today, one has a term that expires in 2024, November 30th. Two are listed as having terms that expire in November 2025. That's Dr. John Bailey and Dr. Iris Jeffries Morton. And there are two members of the board who are listed on the MOTA website as expiring on 11/30/2023. That's Dr. Judith Henry and Dr. Michelle Latortu, but I'm not aware that they've had a hearing recently or even been reappointed. So it just creates confusion in terms of what's happening, who's really on the board, when their terms are, and what the process is for actually appointing and reappointing members of the board. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I just wanted to raise with this committee some of these challenges with the Board of Dentistry logistically and the way MOTA has been handling nominees. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. As you're our only public witness on this, I will just say, I met with the head of MOTA this summer, to discuss the nomination process in general, because I think that the health committee with its 19 boards and commissions, we have a lot of nominees who come through, and trying to work in terms of streamlining the process. We're trying to do the best we can, especially in sort of working in concert with DC Health, as they have a particular interest in making sure that folks are getting through the process, because, they need these are working boards. For those who want my PSA, these are working boards. If you
Absolutely
like to serve on any of these boards or commissions, please reach out to MOTA. But to your point, when people do reach out to MOTA, we want to ensure that they are being heard, or it is not taking several months for someone to get back to them in terms of reviewing their credentials, in terms of moving forward. So we're going to continue to work on that, Mr. Gallagher. And I welcome, I think MOTA is technically under the Committee on Executive Administration and Labor. And so I encourage you to have any conversations with Councilmember Bonds, who chairs that committee as well. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so we are going to call now for Mr. Morales to present his testimony, and he's already here. So before you begin, I need to swear you in. So if you could just raise your right hand in the video screen. There we go, so we can see you. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to provide to the committee on the Council of the District of, to the Council of the District of Columbia and this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Great. Go ahead and present your testimony.
Good morning. Thank you for your time, Councilmember Henderson and members of and staff of the committee. My name is Jose Morales. I know you got a little bit of background from the council member, but I'm pleased to testify today regarding my nomination to the Food Policy Council. I would like to thank Mayor Bowser for the nomination and Councilmember Henderson for holding this hearing and this roundtable. As she said, I grew up in the rural and agricultural town near Merced, California. So that's in the Central Valley, where a lot of our food, even on the East Coast, comes from. Both of my parents were undocumented immigrants from Mexico throughout my childhood. They were actually able to gain their citizenship when I was 20. But, we all worked in food and the agricultural sectors throughout my youth. When I was 13 years old, I worked planting cauliflower in the Central Valley on the back of a tractor. Later in my high school years, selling produce at farmers markets throughout the Bay Area in Oakland, Concord, San Jose. And then during college, I worked at a busy restaurant in Oakland for 4 years. I do have a bachelor's degree from UC Berkeley, aka Cal, in integrative biology. I graduated in 2009, and after that, I joined the Peace Corps and served in the Dominican Republic as a health and nutrition volunteer. During my 2 years of service in the Dominican Republic, I spent countless hours performing cooking demonstrations in numerous small communities, teaching youth about the importance of eating healthily, and also teaching courses in general health and hygiene to small communities throughout the rural Dominican Republic. My service ended in 2011. At that point, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, wanted to come back to her hometown. She grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, went to high school in DC to be near her family. I was in the Washington region for about 3 weeks before starting my job at Keeney Produce and Gourmet in 2012, February of 2012. From there, I started a program at Keeney that they had just rolled out called the Executive Leadership Development Program with 5 other young leaders, where they taught us about leadership and management, coursework through work, and also with consultants coming in to teach courses. During my first 5 years at Keeney, I held 5 different management positions in distinct departments, from sales to purchasing to customer service, as you alluded to, production, and in transportation. Because of this, I've had a truly varied and deep experience with our food supply chain, and continue to draw from my experience as a leader in my company. And I look forward to applying what I've learned at Keeney Produce to the work at the Food Policy Council. Also, I was on the board of Fresh Farm, Community Food Works, and then Fresh Farms for 6 years. So I saw the tremendous growth that Hugo Mogollon has helmed over at Fresh Farm, Community Food Works. So currently my job at Keeney is managing a team of salespeople. I have 6 sales executives that are on my team. We manage about 31% of Keeney Produce and Gourmet's overall sales. Most of my day is spent speaking to producers, to chefs, to purchasing agents from across the region, from properties like the Gaylord at National Harbor to the Salamander in Middleburg, Virginia, or Le Diplomat in downtown DC. Those are all accounts that are under my team. As a first-generation immigrant, representation matters. As a longtime DC resident, 10 plus years, I've lived in Northeast. I believe my experience and close interaction with the growth and development of the DC food scene will add a significant and thoughtful insight to the council. Keeney Produce employs over 350 people throughout the DMV, and my close connection to DC along with my company will give me a unique perspective from the private sector in terms of food distribution. After serving on Fresh Farms board for 6 years, I would love another opportunity to give my time and expertise to build a more equitable and resilient food system. My experience at Fresh Farm really helped me understand the fresh food field here in the DC market, from the public and NGO sector. And I feel strongly that everyone should have access to healthy and nutritious food that meets them where they are. This doesn't only have to be locally grown food, but it should be good food. I'd like to focus on the sustainable supply chain and entrepreneurship and food jobs focus groups. I think those 2 areas of the work of the Food Policy Council really speak to me and my strengths as an operator in the private sector for creating sustainable jobs and truly understanding the basics and the nuances of how we get food to market. My focus while on the board would be to harness the public and private partnerships to help build a food community for the entire DC region. We have farmers, wholesale markets, retailers, distributors, restaurant owners, community organizers who are all trying to solve the same problem: how to get healthy, fresh food into the hands of all who want it. I believe, regulations are typically well-intentioned, but at times can hinder the execution and create barriers where we should have a primary goal of feeding people. My hope is to identify and communicate some of the pitfalls of the legislation and policy early in order to avoid snags down the line during implementation and adoption. Again, thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Morales. And thank you for your willingness to serve. My staff was reviewing the documents that were sent over from MODA. I thought that your background was incredibly impressive, but also very uniquely suited to bring a unique perspective to the Food Policy Council. And so thank you for agreeing to do this. I just have a few questions for you. So first, just sort of coming off of your experience, during the height of the pandemic, you implemented a curbside produce box program in the face of restaurant closures. Can you tell us more about this and what your company saw from the program and anything that we can sort of apply to this endemic phase of life that we're currently in.
Yeah, totally. So that program started out of a necessity. You know, our business is almost entirely food service. We have very small retail that's kind of in its nascent stage now. And you know, a week into the pandemic, I saw this huge need and a huge void in our community. Just going to Instacart and seeing like 2 week lead times on grocery delivery. I saw how you can harness technology to get people to pre-order food. You know, if they kind of have a known quantity when ordering food, it's a lot more effective and people can plan their weeks around it, knowing that there's going to be a consistent, high quality, fairly reasonably priced food box coming to them. I think a lot of different players kind of went into this arena. Because of the change and people feeling more comfortable going out of their house. I think at the height of the pandemic, people really didn't feel comfortable going to a grocery store. We weren't really too sure how COVID was affecting public spaces. This created a really efficient way to get a lot of food to people very quickly. I think what I learned was that, you know, I mean, we just had a truck in a parking lot. I mean, it was all about communication, you know, proper planning, communicating to our customers of what the offerings were going to be, and you really notice that subscription model working for fresh food. And you know, again, we didn't, you know, unfortunately have the capacity to take SNAP or WIC, and I think some of the organizations that do have those abilities really have a huge audience to start to build some of these more regular food subscriptions, which I think, you know, the pop-up food hub and Fresh Farm does a really great job with that. And they do have those like regular customers where they're doing a lot of matching. And again, you know, how can we build that out in like Ward 7 and 8, which again, I think
Yep.
Fresh Farm, you know, they're one organization, you know, with a fairly small budget compared to the total population of the district. So, you know, can we really extrapolate those programs to really get people in Ward 5, Ward 3, Ward 2. You know, every ward has people with insecurity when it comes to food. So how do we get those throughout the district?
Yeah, I definitely, to your point around subscription models can work. I was having a conversation with a former governor of Massachusetts at a time when we were thinking that the only remaining grocery store in Ward 8 might close, around what are some other options of how we can get food to folks. Subscription models, of course, obviously require you to think ahead. Like you got a meal plan because you can't, you know, oh, now I want to do tacos. Wait, I don't have lettuce. I don't have tomatoes, all of these, you know, other ingredients. But I just think that was incredibly innovative in that moment. And I hope that, to your point around harnessing technology to be able to, how can we get fresh produce to people faster? I think that's something that we should be exploring more often. In terms of overall big picture, what would you say is the biggest challenge to the district's food system right now that the Health Policy Council you feel like should be working on?
You know, I was thinking about it after, you know, the prep session on Monday. And I think, you know, I love New York's bodega culture. I think if DC could build some micro markets and like really help the math work for operators, right? Like I live like right on, you know, West Virginia and Mount Olivet. You know, we have, you know, Jabo Market. There's some small stores and they have some small grocery items. You know, can we help educate people on how to make the business side work so they don't see it as like a hindrance? They don't see it as like a, hey, I just end up throwing away, you know, fresh produce. You know, how do we make sure that those corner markets, you know, people already go there. Unfortunately, it's a lot of very highly processed foods. You know, how do we start to include fruits and vegetables in there? And I know that DC Central Kitchen has some programs for like the small fresh markets, you know, so how do we kind of get all of those, you know, people who are trying these different ideas, right? Fresh Farm has a pop-up food hub. DC Central Kitchen has their Healthy Corners program. You know, how do we start to get, all right, can we kind of all work together to solve this one big problem? You know, we're all trying to figure out the same thing, you know, and there's finite resources, but we have a lot of great, smart people. So, you know, hopefully harnessing the Food Policy Council and their experience and their connections with those different NGOs and organizations to work together to get food in those, again, micro corners, because you have those in Ward 7 and 8. You have them throughout the city. And, how do you have them actually become a place where people think, hey, I need to grab something really quick, whether it's a head of garlic or an onion, and make them effective.
Yeah, I'm originally from New York, so you say the bodega culture, that definitely speaks to me. When I go back to visit my dad, it's just always so fun. I'm like, oh, I can walk down, I can get toilet paper, I can get a hero or a bagel, I can grab
Yeah.
my coffee, or just the
A
other
banana, an
banana. Yes,
apple, I mean, an orange, again,
exactly.
those are small things, but like it's a huge, huge asset to communities.
Right.
So,
And we
you
already
know,
have these markets that are in community. So how can we provide the additional resources? I've had good conversations with DC Central Kitchen about the Healthy Corners program, and even
mhm.
talking to some of the market, or I won't refer to them as bodegas here because they're not quite there yet, but they're budding and desiring micro markets, as you say.
Mhm.
And even for them, it's like, you know, if I had assistance in terms of purchasing refrigerators so that I can offer more fresh produce that needs to be kept in a cool climate, those types of
So,
small things to kind
or
of
how
help.
much should I charge? How much should I be buying? Like, how do
Yeah.
I figure out my pars, right? Like, I think produce buying is a very specific skill. And, can we offer some of that? Can we standardize some of that expertise? So, like, hey, you shouldn't keep your apples out. Like, put them in the fridge, put the oranges in the fridge, but don't put the bananas in the fridge. Don't put the tomatoes in the fridge. Like, there are these like little, people also the food should taste good. So, I
Yes.
think how do you have to kind of marry both. So.
Yeah. So I know you live in Ward 5, but
Mhm.
obviously you're not being chosen for the Food Policy Council specifically for one particular area. But when you talk to your neighbors and community, what changes do they want to see in terms of food access?
I mean, I think like
Okay.
make it easy for the corner markets. I think there's just like, you have, again, in my ward, I'm very fortunate. I live kind of like right between a Mom's Organic, a Target, and a Whole Foods. Like, out of those three, I can like really cobble to, like, I don't need to go to a Giant or a Safeway or Harris Teeter. But those stores are expensive. And I mean, I think, Aldi is like not too far away either, but I do think for a lot of people, maybe they don't have cars, they don't have, adequate transportation. I think, I don't know. To me, there's a big need about in that area, and I would love to see a little more development there. We recently got a farmers market in Trinidad, which I'm super grateful for. Try to go every week. I think also creating awareness about those and access around them. I think they can be a little bit intimidating at times for people that are not used to a farmers market. So I know with Fresh Farm they do a lot of outreach and documentations and try to get people to feel comfortable at the market. And maybe we just do like a community market tour where a community member comes out and can kind of talk to them about the ins and out of a farmer's market.
Yeah. I was
um
actually thinking the other day, like this rising, I'm not on TikTok, but this rising
Me neither.
rise in terms of social media influence, just to inform people about what's available.
Hmm.
Because, and we've had this conversation with DC Central Kitchen, right? Like they have these healthy corner programs where these markets are actually, they offer quite a bit of things, but from the outside, you may not know unless you go inside. And so do we just allow readily inform people around like, hey, do you know, like you can go down to your corner and get milk and also
Hmm.
X, Y, and Z. Um, so my last question for you is around time commitment. So obviously you're volunteering of your time, but do you feel like you have the time available to you in order to be a full participant of the Food Policy Council?
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, I was just on the board of Fresh Farm, which was like a similar amount of time commitment. This might be a little bit more, but Dalila Bachlan, who's is a good friend of mine, is on the council now. And if anything, I'm really excited to be able to spend more time, catching up and working together and getting to know the other people in the community around food.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Morales. I appreciate again your willingness to serve, and thank you so much for being here. I don't have any further questions for you.
Thank you.
Right. All right, we will now turn to consider PR 25-529, which nominates Caroline Howe to be the Food Policy Director for the District of Columbia. Caroline Howe joined the Office of Planning as the Acting Food Policy Director in June of 2023. Prior to this role, she worked in several other district government agencies at the intersection of sustainable food systems, social equity, and entrepreneurship. At the Department of Small and Local Business Development, she created and led the Food Waste Innovation Grant Program and the Aspire Program for Entrepreneurship. For justice involved individuals. At the Department of Energy and Environment, she coordinated an implementation of Sustainable DC 2.0 and served a detail at the COVID-19 Emergency Operations Center, focused on expanding home delivery and grocery access. At the University of the District of Columbia, she taught food and farm entrepreneurship classes while expanding value-added processing at markets. In addition to her government experience, Caroline has worked throughout the food system, including as a farmer, a cooking instructor in food pantries, and a food entrepreneur. Caroline has a master's in city planning from Massachusetts Institute of Technology with a concentration in environmental policy and planning, and she has a bachelor's in science and environmental engineering from Yale. As the food policy director, she would lead the food policy division of the Office of Planning, which provides strategic direction and guidance on food policy priorities for the district, including food insecurity and healthy food access. The food policy director oversees the DC Food Policy Council and collaborates with district agencies and community leaders to promote healthy food production and access, support food entrepreneurs, and achieve the food goals identified in the Sustainable DC Plan. She would report directly to the director of the Office of Planning. Since Ms. Howe has been serving as the acting director since June, I've asked her to testify both on her qualifications for this appointment, as well as on the performance of the Food Policy Council in fiscal year 2023. She will present her testimony on both topics together, and then the committee will ask first questions on your appointment, then questions on performance. And so I now call you, and you can, before you present your testimony, I do have to swear you in. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to provide to the Council of the District of Columbia and this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Great. If you just turn your mic on and you can present your testimony.
Good morning, Councilmember Henderson, members, and staff of the committee. My name is Caroline Howe, and I'm pleased to testify today to my nomination as Food Policy Director, as well as the fiscal year 2023 performance of the Food Policy Council. I would like to thank Mayor Muriel Bowser for the nomination and Councilmember Henderson and her team for holding this roundtable. I am grateful to the government of the District of Columbia for the opportunity to serve in multiple roles over the past 6 years before I accepted this nomination in June. Through work with the Department of Small and Local Business Development, the Department of Energy and Environment, the COVID-19 Emergency Operations Center, and the University of the District of Columbia, I've gained rich experience and strong relationships across district government and diverse communities. I've worked with the district's urban farmers, food businesses from startups to legacy establishments, food producers and food processors, nutrition educators, returning citizens, and residents of all 8 wards of the district. During my time working for the district, I helped create the globally celebrated Food Waste Innovation Grants at DSLBD that has helped dozens of businesses cut their costs, reduce waste, feed their neighbors, and decrease the district's greenhouse gas emissions. I expanded the Aspire to Entrepreneurship program, seeing more than 60 returning citizens through the creation and growth of their own businesses, including both catering and food manufacturing businesses. As part of the Food Policy Council's Entrepreneurship and Food Jobs Working Group, I helped launch a series of kitchen matchmaking events to connect small food businesses to the commercial kitchens they need to get officially licensed. I was proud to serve during the COVID-19 public health emergency to work with grocery stores and food establishments to implement both safety precautions and address their supply chain challenges. I also helped bring small businesses online. I coordinated the software creation with DC Health and Produce Plus to match thousands of eligible individuals with markets nearest them for free produce during the COVID-19 pandemic. This software has also been used to allow 2 Black-owned food businesses to expand their produce delivery. As you mentioned, at DOEE, I facilitated the implementation of Sustainable DC 2.0 with a focus of intersections between food and all of the other parts of sustainability. And while at UDC, I'm proud to have taught undergraduate and master's students about entrepreneurship while also working with businesses in Ward 7 and 8, starting their own value-added food business. Throughout my roles in district government, I regularly participated in the DC Food Policy Council meetings. I've been able to serve as an ex officio co-chair of the Urban Agriculture, then Sustainable Supply Chain, and then the Entrepreneurship and Food Jobs Working Group. I have loved working with past and current members of the Food Policy Council to engage communities on food system challenges and to drive positive change in the district's food system. As much as I wish I could have continued to work under former Director Ona Balkis, when the opportunity came up to lead the Food Policy Council and advise both the mayor and council on food policy priorities, it was absolutely a dream. While I'm grateful for my 6 years serving the district, my prior decade of work globally also built my experience in the food system. My jobs in high school were working different roles on an organic farm, planting, harvesting, and of course, mostly weeding, all of which built my respect for our farm workers and food distribution. From there, I went on to teach children composting and gardening in 3 languages. I turned waste vegetable oil into school bus biodiesel. I've started food businesses, managed farmers markets, both volunteered in and had to rely on food pantries. I've run food safety and knife skills classes and translated kid-friendly recipes. I'm proud to have spent my career working at the intersection of health, equity, and sustainability. And I would love to leverage that work to make the district food system more equitable, healthy, and sustainable. If confirmed, my goals as food policy director would continue the council's momentum of great work and policy successes under former food policy director Balkis and strengthen our intersectionality. Food inequities are intersectional, and I want to shine a light on the way that race, gender, and sexual orientation impact access to food so we can find solutions. Those that help the most marginalized will help everyone. Food access is intersectional, and I want to build solutions to food access in the context of the district's challenges around housing, displacement, transportation, and public safety. The food system is intersectional, and I would continue to bring together staff from across district agencies to address our intersectional challenges, which will leverage my strength in facilitation as well as my experience working not just in different agencies, but entirely different clusters of the district government. In my first 6 months as acting director, I've already demonstrated these collaboration skills. I'm particularly proud to have facilitated 3 interagency collaborations to bring federal funds to the district. For the Resilient Food System Infrastructure Grants, I built partnerships with DOEE and DEMPED to bring $2 million to the district to support small food businesses in the middle of the supply chain. I've built a collaborative planning process between the Department of Human Services and the Office of the State Superintendent of Education to create a plan for implementing summer EBT that will reach the young people who need it most when school is out of session. This plan, if implemented, would allow us to leverage a small amount of local funds to access $8 million in USDA funds for children during the summer that will then go to our district grocers, farmers markets, and our small corner stores. At the same time, I've managed consultants and a network of 6 other agencies to further our analysis of the benefits of a central food processing facility and options for its organization, with a report that will be released in early 2024. We released our 2022 food system assessment in the last 6 months while also developing our 2023 food system assessment, which has been reformatted to be more accessible and clearer for both residents and policymakers alike. Within the Food Policy Council, I've continued my work of the past few years to make the Food Policy Council's online meetings as engaging and dynamic as possible, while also facilitating the extra challenge of hybrid meetings. I've facilitated the first of our 2024 planning retreats, bringing the council back together to look forward. I've expanded our network of ex officio members to include key agencies that were included in the initial legislation but haven't been active in the past few years, including the Department of General Services, DC Public Schools, and the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection. We're bringing on new public members to fill the positions of those who have stepped down, including, I hope, José Morales. And I'm excited about the applicants we are reviewing to potentially join the council in 2024. We have an incredibly diverse set of both appointed and ex officio members in demographics, perspectives, and experience. 2023 has been a big year for the Food Policy Council. We've increased food policy engagement both online and in person, with my staff attending dozens of community events this fall to get in-person feedback. while also hosting listening sessions online to gather input on our USDA grant opportunities, the 2024 priorities, and the challenges facing small food businesses in this post-pandemic era. Our full Food Policy Council and working group meetings have showcased the way policies are being implemented, such as the Green Food Purchasing Amendment Act. The Nourish DC grants have continued to support growing food businesses in the way the FPC hoped for, and we've increased their impact with local philanthropic dollars to expand Keeping It Cool grants for cold storage. Working groups have done great work conducting research and disseminating information, both about existing district programs as well as knowledge and best practices that can benefit small food businesses and institutional food buyers. FPC members have presented locally, regionally, nationally, and globally about the district's food innovations. The FPC's work informed 2 pieces of legislation that have already passed, Give SNAP a Raise and No Senior Hungry Omnibus Act. And with our Universal School Meals Policy Brief, we've also been a part of informing proposed legislation. We continue to increase opportunities for residents to share their food experiences with council. We've spread the word about ways for residents to share their perspectives on 2 proposed Food Systems Act, the Fresh Starts Act around food served in the DC jail, and the Universal Free Schools Meals Act, which will have its hearing tomorrow on November 30th. I'm proud of the work of the FPC in the last year, as well as the work I've done so far for the district, but I understand there's more to accomplish. Between inflation and the rising cost of food, along with the continuous threat of a federal shutdown, there's a lot of uncertainty for many of our residents. At the same time, there's so much energy in the district to increase food access, build our food economy, and create a healthy, sustainable, and equitable food system. I'm optimistic about the Food Policy Council and Food Policy Division's plans for 2024. While FPC's 2024 priorities are not yet finalized, it's clear that we will focus on some key themes. Increasing participation of those impacted by food funding and district food programming in the budget and agency oversight process. Coordinating across the district to promote existing opportunities to both individuals and businesses. Supporting BIPOC-owned food businesses in serving both their communities and accessing district contracts. And shining a light on the intersections between affordable housing and urban agriculture. Plus exploring how better to see more farmers markets serving our food apartheid neighborhoods with more options through more of the year. I'm honored to be serving as the acting director, and I would love the opportunity to be appointed as the official director of food policy. Thank you again, Councilmember Henderson and team, for holding this roundtable and for your support, both of the Food Policy Council and for the vision we all share of a healthy, equitable, and sustainable food system for the district. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. You covered a lot and we could have given him more time. But it's also very exciting to hear about some of the work that you've already done. But I want to start with your background and talk about the confirmation process, and then we'll sort of switch to the questions about the work of the council thus far. So before this role, you created and ran the Food Waste Innovation Grants at DSLBD. What types of projects or grantees were eligible for those types of grants? And is this program continuing since your departure?
Thank you for that great question. It's a program I love to talk about. The Food Waste Innovation Grants allowed businesses, small businesses specifically, those with fewer than 25 full-time employees, to be able to access all kinds of resources to cut food waste. So that included many grantees did invest in cold storage to be able to better refrigerate their food. Some invested in food processing equipment or food preservation like dehydrators, or for our small stores that we were talking about earlier, to be able to process produce that couldn't be sold immediately into prepared foods. And that's a huge way that small businesses are able to really make money from selling produce. We also saw businesses invest in ways to process or transform food scraps. So that might be things like taking vegetable peels and turning them into garnishes, or in some really creative collaboration, seeing food scraps from one business go into food for another. So Fish Scale invested in turning their true fish scales into dog food treats, as an example, or other businesses that had scraps of meat being able to create really high quality burgers. We also saw businesses invest in composting, and the Food Waste Innovation Grants did fund composting for for many businesses throughout the district, diverting hundreds of thousands of pounds of food scraps into composting.
How much money, and I should know this, but like how much money do we give out?
Yep, $500,000 was distributed in both 2022 and early 2023.
Okay.
So that was fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. This was funded at $300,000 in the fiscal year 2024 budget, but to the best of my knowledge, those funds may well be swept. It is unclear whether the food waste innovation grants will be happening in fiscal year 2024, but that is a decision
Above you. It's okay.
above me. Yeah.
So you talked a lot about your work with small businesses, small food businesses, and small food business entrepreneurs, both, UDC, DSLPD, et cetera. What would you say is like the greatest challenge now for new or existing food businesses in the district?
I continue to think that one of the biggest challenges for businesses looking to get started is affordable kitchen space. So you cannot get a food license in the district without having that commercial kitchen to operate in. And that might be anywhere from a few hundred to $1,200 just to access a shared commercial kitchen space. So when you're just getting started, when you're first selling your first products, that's a huge barrier. And because cottage food doesn't allow any hot food, any catering, hot sauces, things like that, that are a huge part of what our smallest businesses are trying to make and sell. They need those kitchen spaces. So while we did a lot around kitchen matchmaking, there still aren't enough shared kitchens, particularly in Ward 7 and 8.
I'm looking over here at ONA because we had conversations earlier this year about the cottage food laws, and that's a project we desire in our future.
I would love to follow up with you and your team about that.
Awesome. But I think that's an interesting thing. I like food halls a lot. I just went to the one at Bryant Street Market across from Alamo.
Yes,
Delicious.
so cute too.
Super cute. But also I see it as an ability to, now be clear, I don't know what they're charging for rent, but to the extent that we are able to DC government build out maybe spaces that allow for multiple businesses to share in that, I think actually, you know, people like options.
Absolutely. And food halls are such a good solution for a dense urban environment because you're really sharing seating space. Otherwise, so many restaurants, you're paying rent for seating space where that isn't continuously used. And so having a shared food hall where for example, in the Bryant Street Market, you have coffee shops and breakfast places that are thriving in the morning, and then late night spots where those other places would otherwise be empty.
Right.
And I do think, while I can't speak to that in particular, lots of our other food halls that have opened recently, Western Market in the last few years as well, we really do see our small food businesses being able to then open another location.
Mhm, mhm.
And I hope that we're going to see more of those. Even the Anacostia Art Center and the future Market 7 will create those east of in Ward 7 and 8 as well.
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, Sycamore and Oak is another great example of this as well, where you're seeding these opportunities for small entrepreneur food businesses to grow. You're bringing options to a community that doesn't necessarily have them. And then again, I definitely, what we see with Union Market, we've had a lot of spin-off companies who have then since opened their own space. And so I think that's a really interesting, unique way for us to bring more sit down eating opportunities to places where you're not necessarily needing one business to hold down the whole front all day. But also seeing a lot more businesses fostering these own relationships with each other to share space. So like ANXO Cidery, which, who's drinking cider at 9 o'clock in the morning? I mean, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, but that's not me. But they partnered with Lost Socks roasters. And so it was a coffee shop in the morning and then it switched over to a cidery at night. We're seeing, I think, that a lot more.
Absolutely. And I think through the work of the Food Policy Council's Entrepreneurship and Food Jobs Working Group, the matchmaking series that I talked about was also matching not just larger format shared commercial kitchens, but existing businesses. And we did see small businesses open up their space, and there remain barriers to that. So currently, changes at DLCP mean that a business that wants to share its space, even with one other business, a coffee shop like that, needs to get a shared kitchen license. And for small businesses,
Wait, what's the difference between a shared kitchen license and just the regular? I mean,
they would need to pay for and go through the licensing process again.
for what reason? The kitchen hasn't changed.
Exactly. A interesting question.
Okay.
So
Okay.
something I would love to follow up with you and your team.
Okay. Yeah. That's something to me. I'm like, it's the exact same kitchen. Nothing has changed except for someone is using it in the daytime versus someone who's using it at night. Although I'm probably thinking the shared kitchen license is probably more expensive than the regular kitchen license. Okay. Yeah.
And I think that for many businesses, just coming back to a goal of the Food Policy Council around licensing is streamlining the process.
Okay.
There are a dozen different food licenses in the district, and many of our peer cities and states have 2 or 3 or 1. And so really figuring out how people navigate that process. And while there are incredible agencies in the district like DSLBD, DEMPED, our partners at Howard and the Small Business Administration, Small Business Development Center at DLCP, really try to help people navigate it, it remains confusing and quite expensive.
Yeah. So this is kind of the hard thing. I want to continue on, and I am going to just continue on this line of conversation as opposed to just saying I'm going to talk about the confirmation process. But part of the role of the food policy director is doing collaborations with other agencies. We just had a really interesting exchange here around some of the work that we need to do in collaboration with the Department of Licensing and Consumer Affairs to make sure that we're streamlining the process. Have you had an opportunity to meet with Director Crow? She's new over there to talk about some of these things.
Yes, I have had the pleasure of meeting Director Crow. I am really excited about the future of DLCP under her direction. And I am really excited that she appointed someone from her team to actually serve on the Food Policy Council.
Perfect.
So this will be next Monday is our Food Policy Council annual full day retreat. It will be the first day that we'll have DLCP at the table. And I'm really excited about what can be possible with more of that collaboration. And I also think that there are some, one thing we did this year was conduct a survey and listening sessions, both in English and in Spanish, for small food businesses to understand the challenges they're facing. Licensing definitely came up, kitchen space came up, and so did lots of other specific challenges. And so I think one way I see our role, both my role as the director and the Food Policy Council as a whole, is really fostering that collaboration, but also bringing together resident voices and compiling those in a way that are really easily digestible for decision makers like you and like Director Crow.
Great. So you've been serving as the acting director now since June. What would you say have been your priorities during the first 6 months in this role?
Well, I definitely think that a big priority for me in these first 6 months was bringing the Food Policy Council back together. There was unfortunately a gap between former Director Balkus and my appointment. And so really bringing the council back together virtually and in person in terms of our retreat, and bringing back our ex officio members who had not been active. There was a lot of change throughout 2022 in terms of staffing at different agencies. So to be honest, our ex officio members, a lot are quite new. And so really onboarding those, as well as managing transition in the appointed members, that's been a huge priority for me. Another really big priority has been building those relationships with our partner agencies. I spoke to it a bit in my testimony, but being able to bring DOEE and DEMPED together for this new opportunity that USDA created of the Resilient Food System Infrastructure Grants. And it was just when I arrived to this role in July that USDA announced the summer EBT opportunity. And so being able to bring together DHS and OSSI and the lab at DC together on that was really powerful to be able to see, okay, how do we really take advantage of these federal opportunities in a time of tightening budget in the district? How do we take advantage of federal funds? And looking at the connections between those federal funds. USDA has offered a lot of funding to food businesses and the food system, and figuring out the ways to make the most of those has been another big priority.
Mhm.
And then lastly, I'd say we did have a lot of pieces of required reporting that we needed to get together. So the central food processing facility that I mentioned, as
Mhm.
well as our food system assessment, have been other really big priorities over the last few years. Few
All right.
months, excuse me.
Now, since you mentioned some of these particular reports, and it's not just you guys, I would just say that for the record. I think I've sent 2 letters now to the city administrator about a variety of different reports for which had been required and missing, and I think are actually quite helpful in conversations. This particular one, can you talk about the status of the centralized kitchen feasibility study? So for those folks who don't know, it's a feasibility study around a centralized kitchen for DC public schools as opposed to I'll just say their current arrangement. So we funded this in the FY23 budget. We're in FY24. What's going on?
I'm so glad you asked about that. I am thrilled to have the work of our consultants who did incredible analysis around the possibilities of a central food processing facility and really looking at the benefits both for DC public schools as well as other agencies. So we brought together looking at the DACL senior meals, summer meals, what are all of the possibilities for a central
Mhm.
food processing facility?
Did it include DOC?
It
Sorry, Department of Correction.
Oh, no, thank you. We did reach out to DOC, and obviously I think that they would be a key partner in a central food processing facility. We
Okay.
did not get a response from DOC regarding the details around the meal or the possibility for DOC
Okay.
or DYRS to be including their meals.
Mhm.
We were, however, we did a lot of contract analysis around available public information around contracts. And so we have done some estimates and included some assumptions around the possibility of having DOC and DYRS included in the central food processing facility.
Okay. So what's the timeline?
Great. So I am very confident that we will be able to get you this report as well as our proposed next steps from the report in the first quarter of calendar year 2024.
All right. Q1 of 2024. Now we're having a performance oversight conversation now. So I will actually have you for a hearing in Q1 of 2024, I think, but we'll follow up on that. front.
Absolutely. I'm really excited about it. And so I can't wait to get it to you as soon as possible.
Mhm. And I think that, I think it's an interesting conversation around, because we spend a lot of money on food across the city, to varying degrees of quality, depending on who is contracting, depending on who's doing work, depending on whatever the reimbursements are, right? And this might be a way to streamline it, if not for DC public schools, but for some of the other agencies who are doing some of this work.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think, we, in the analysis, estimated that the district overall serves 45 million meals a year.
45 million.
45 million meals a year, at a reimbursement of anywhere between $1 and $8 a meal. It's a huge range. And there really are so many different scales of where we can go with a central food processing facility, given that, the estimates of what we would need to be able to really be serving that many meals is over 150,000 square feet. The idea of finding a location like that in the district. Exactly. So we really looked at what a potentially centralized facility could look like.
Yeah.
In order to look at something like a centralized bakery serving bread for all of the district, a centralized dairy processing facility that could be making a lot of those, that would also be increasing quality and cutting out a lot of preservatives. So there's real opportunities that we looked at in this that I think make it much more realistic for the district's reality.
Yeah. Now you got me wondering who has a $1 reimbursement?
The Department of Corrections.
that tracks on their meal quality. Okay. All right. Let me back up on some things. I think you kind of covered this a little bit, but you know, you have a large expertise in environmental policy. How do you see that intertwining with your role for food policy director?
I'm really excited that I spent so long working in the climate space in particular, in looking both at climate mitigation and climate adaptation. The intersections between climate change and our food system are enormous. When we look at both how our food system has an impact on the district's carbon emissions, but also when we look at a changing climate on food access. That's not just in terms of how food is being grown and the agricultural impact of as TOEE says, a warmer, wetter, and wilder climate. It's not just in food production, but it's in food access. If you have to take 2 buses to get to your grocery store and it is now 105, 110 degrees out, it is a very different experience of accessing that food and even the possibility of food spoilage on your return back home. The intersection is also in terms of where we are distributing that food. If we're expecting people to be waiting in long lines in the heat or in potentially other changing weather. And so I'm really excited about being able to make those connections as we look at what food access looks like in a warming world. But I also think that this connection to sustainability is so key when we're looking at both how we're buying, where we're buying our food from, and then how we're disposing of it. The reality of is if we are going to meet our sustainable DC goals in terms of food waste diversion, in terms of recycling, and in terms of food access, we are going to need to be wasting less food. We're currently wasting 40% of the food that we buy. That is money that the district is paying for, that residents are paying for, and that we are then just sending to landfill where we continue to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really important connection for me. And of course, I think while a lot of my background has always been in sustainability, it is always at the intersection of sustainability and equity,
Mm-hmm.
where the impacts of a system that focuses on waste, a system that creates this kind of impact in our communities, that is all tied to the folks who are most impacted by our food system are also those impacted by our waste system.
Yeah. You know, as you talk, Caroline, I have to say, it feels as though this food policy director job is like perfectly designed for you and your background and role.
I feel that way. I absolutely feel like I've stepped into a dream role, and I feel really qualified to be able to serve the district in this way.
Yeah, I agree. So I ask you some questions now, a little bit about the performance of the
Sounds good.
council, recognizing that you haven't been there for the entire time. But you talked a little bit about this already. So in 2023, you all successfully applied for $2 million federal grant for resilient food system infrastructure. My understanding is that DMPED will implement this grant. So how will this funding be spent, and how will you all be involved? How will the council be involved in the determination of how it's going to be spent?
So in the proposal that we submitted to USDA, $1.4 million will be going in grants to district organizations in the middle of the food supply chain.
Okay.
So that is folks who are moving, once food has been harvested, moving it to the plate. So anything in the middle of the supply chain means food distribution, food sale, and food processing. So that $1.4 million will go to district businesses. There's also
Will you guys, sorry,
Oh,
will
yeah.
the council be involved in that grant application process?
Yes. So as it currently stands, DMPED, in a little bit like Nourish DC, has an interagency advisory board, which includes folks from my office, the Food Policy Division at OP, the Department of Energy and Environment, DMPED, DSLBD, and DC Health. We are looking at a similar advisory group for the administration of the Resilient Food System Infrastructure grant. So we would be involved in shaping both the application, the criteria, and the promotion of the grants. DEMPED would be administering in terms of making sure that the reimbursement process with the USDA is moving smoothly. They're also the ones running the request for applications for a grant administrator.
Okay.
That should be opening shortly. The other way that we'll be involved is in the current proposal. The district will also be involved in the supply chain coordination the USDA is interested in supporting. And that position would be in the food policy division at OP. So we would have a temporary position for the duration of the grant, which is 3 years, that would cover an FTE really focused on coordinating in the district supply chain. So district procurement, looking at local sourcing, and really moving forward this idea of the district purchasing more local produce, doing some intermediate or full processing, and then getting it to the agencies that need it.
Okay. Has the hiring for this FTE begun?
No, we are still waiting for full USDA. They have allocated us the funds. We are waiting on their approval of our state plan.
Okay.
Before those funds would be awarded, but we are anticipating both that the grants need to open in calendar year 2024. The USDA requires us to get them, our proposed grantees, by May of 2024. And so we would be looking at a person starting in that supply chain coordination role in both fiscal year and calendar year 2024.
Okay. Well, how many FTEs do you currently have right now?
A wonderful question. So currently we, right now, the food policy division at OP is myself and 1 FTE as well as 2 partial FTEs. We work really across the Office of Planning. We have 20% of 1 FTE's time and 10% of another FTE's time in citywide planning and neighborhood planning. We are actively reviewing our applications. Our application closed last week for our other FTE who will be coming in a grade 12. And so.
Oh, so right now you have 1 vacancy.
We have 1 vacancy.
Okay, got it. All right. Okay. You also mentioned this a little bit. Okay, so how the Food Policy Council facilitated the district joining the summer EBT program. Can you describe, are there any changes being made at the federal level to the summer EBT program, which would require additional financial assistance?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked. This year is the first year that USDA has approved nationwide summer EBT. So what the district's been a part of during the pandemic was called pandemic EBT. And that was always viewed as a temporary program. The pandemic stretched longer than anyone expected, but pandemic EBT was a really streamlined process that USDA created. And so with summer EBT, there have been a lot of changes in terms of what USDA is requiring us of implementation. So I do want to clarify that the district has not yet signed our letter of intent to commit because we do not yet have those funds allocated.
How much is it?
Wonderful question. We're still finalizing. DHS is working on finalizing that budget, and we're looking at the local contribution of somewhere less than $2 million that will be matched. We are required to have a 50% match of the administrative costs. So USDA would cover $2 million, and we would need to meet $2 million in a combination of in-kind and direct financial investment.
Okay, but that would only cover administrative costs.
That would cover the administrative costs. The USDA is fully covering the actual EBT, which is $40 a month, $120 for the summer per child. We're looking at 80,000 children in the district. So we're estimating receiving from the USDA $8 million if the district opts into this program. So we've been developing a plan for this in collaboration with DHS, OSCE, the lab at DC.
Okay.
In order to create a meaningful plan that would allow us, if the mayor and council support moving forward with summer EBT and funding this, we would be able to roll this out in 2024, otherwise in 2025.
Okay.
It's really the reason that the administration costs are higher in terms of local investment is not just because USDA is asking for a 50% match, but also because they're requiring significantly more applications. In the past, any student who's attending a community eligibility provision school did not need to apply. Every student at a CEP school was able to directly get summer EBT, as well as the direct certification students whose parents are on SNAP, TANF, or WIC. This year, anyone in those CEP schools who is not direct certification does have to reapply. So we're looking at processing potentially 40,000 student applications.
Ooh.
A wonderful question. The way that we've divided these roles is that Aussie is going to be managing the application process in partnership with the lab at DC. We are working on really amazing communications, technology, and data management processes that would streamline this process. And then DHS will be managing the implementation with their existing contract with FIS.
We will talk about this more offline.
I look forward to continuing to discuss that with your team and you.
I just had a meeting with DHS and the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services. I don't know how they will process 40,000 applications of summer EBT on top of the 18,000 Medicaid applications that are currently pending, the 7,000 SNAP applications that are currently pending, and the ooh.
Absolutely. And I do want to clarify that that's why we've been working so hard together to figure out what does this look like in a way that reduces the burden on DHS in particular. So having Aussie manage this application process, essentially once we are aware of the students who are eligible, that will go directly to the vendor who will issue those cards. There is absolutely going to be, that's also why our team is involved to figure out how we can support in this outreach, in making sure that everyone who's eligible knows that they're eligible.
Yeah.
And also why the lab is involved. But we are absolutely aware that this is also a really significant customer service lift. And that's why we really want to be budgeting to be able to have that kind of customer service support so that participants in summer EBT, these young people, their parents and their families are having the best possible experience and actually able to take advantage of summer EBT. And USDA has really encouraged us and supported us in weaving this together with our other summer feeding programs. Summer EBT is super complementary and not a replacement for summer meals.
Yep.
But we want people to know how they can take advantage of it and how they can make use of the district and other federal funds
Right.
in terms of EBT match and all those other programs.
Right. And obviously that's not, this isn't us. This is like my frustration when I put on my former federal government employee hat of like folks thinking that you have to, like, we do these difficult admin hoops that folks have to jump through in hopes that people won't do it and therefore the cost of the program will go down. But not realizing on the, like, you know, the federal side, they're up here. So they don't realize what it will take for a local jurisdiction on top of everything else to have to inform people about the applications, stand up an application process. So now I understand why the admin cost is so high. Cause at first I was like, I don't understand, like just mail the cards, but
Right.
now I get it. Okay. Let's talk about grocery store access. So as you know, the district has a longstanding grocery store gap where districts, residents in wards 5, 7, and 8 have far less access to grocery stores than residents in the other parts of the district. We have incentive programs. We've got tax things. DMPED has a grant program, but I don't think we're seeing very much meaningful progress happening in terms of opening more stores in these wards. And perhaps we need to take a look in terms of what Mr. Morales was talking around micro markets as opposed to full standing grocery stores. But full standing grocery stores are also a nice option because it's like a one-stop shop. Like no one wants to go 3 places to be able to shop for their family in a week. So DMPED has the Food Access Fund, which has awarded over $15 million in grants. But my understanding is that most of these funds have gone towards restaurants and not grocery stores. So how can the Food Policy Council engage with DMPED to ensure that we're not just focusing on sort of one sector of the food access system?
I really appreciate that question. It is always on my mind and one of the things that keeps me up at night. How do we actually see this change? We have incredible goals in terms of increasing the number of full service grocery stores in wards 5, 7, and 8, but we have not seen that change. So I think there's certainly ways for us to really hear from grocers, and we have been listening to grocers about what are, is the tax incentive working? What are the other financial and other programmatic incentives we can provide to have more full service grocery stores in wards 5, 7, and 8? Fundamentally, full service grocery stores, as we understand them, were designed for suburbs and were never designed for an urban environment. And so I do think we have to think creatively about what alternatives to the 20,000 square foot, 50,000 square foot grocery store are. And those might be smaller, more compact full service grocery stores. And we do have some of those. Trader Joe's, Lidl or Aldi are much smaller format than a Giant, a Safeway.
Right.
But I do think that we need both, and we need to make sure that those grocery stores that we are incentivizing to come in accept all of our district benefits. And
Yes.
that's one thing that I'm really excited for the Food Policy Council and my team at OP to be working much more closely with DEMPED to make sure that the grocery stores that we're funding to come in are accepting WIC, SNAP, and TANF.
I appreciate hearing you say that, because I feel like there's always this like, I want to applaud the new grocery store in a certain area, but if the new grocery store doesn't accept WIC, then that is a benefit option that is not available to people who live in that area. And then upon realizing, though, it is possible, folks at DEMPED who are cutting these deals just don't know.
Totally.
They're focused on the nuts and bolts and not on these types of specifics. And I feel like this is the important place of the food policy director to be able to say, hey, let's just make sure we're checking all the boxes here, not to impede, but to ensure that we are making full equity at the center of our investments.
Absolutely. And I think another place where we can be looking at that are grocers who are making what is an investment in order to be able to accept SNAP online.
Yeah.
So we've seen since 2020, when the district was first allowed by USDA to work with grocers who were taking SNAP online for home deliveries, we've seen now 12% of all SNAP in the district was spent online for home delivery.
Wow.
And that's a significant amount of money, and yet there are only 7 grocery stores in the district of our 41 who are processing SNAP online. So that is such a small percentage, and it is currently a huge barrier for our smaller, locally owned, small format grocers, like in Ward 7 and 8 Fresh Food Factory or Veggie City DC, these really small format grocers, to be able to be accepting SNAP online and enabling deliveries, because certainly having people come in person is a key part of a business thriving.
Oh, yeah.
People also
Because you don't just get what you have on your list.
right.
It's like Target.
Yes.
You always walk out with something that you didn't plan to get when you go in person.
Absolutely. But also everyone deserves the ability that people with highest wealth have to be able to have your groceries delivered. There's such a convenience factor in that, while it does require that planning ahead you were touching on earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I also think there's some specific ways to your earlier conversation about micro markets and bringing produce into more. Healthy Corners has expanded, and we now have 54 corner stores that are selling produce thanks to DC Health and DC Central Kitchen. And we've heard in particular through the food waste innovation grants, and that's one way I see this coming together, is that of our small format locally owned grocers, which are currently all in wards 1 and 4, things like Each Peach, Odd Provisions, those grocers are able to have so much produce because they have a space with a kitchen, because they process produce that could not be sold into ready to eat food that actually has a higher margin. And so we need to be looking not only at giving people a refrigerator, but also a license and a space to be able to process some of that food into ready to eat foods. Because we see all across the economy so much more purchasing of prepared and semi-prepared meals.
Yeah.
And so looking at those opportunities to be able to give those existing vendors at those existing markets in wards 5, 7, and 8 the space and benefit to be able to make those margins and really sell a greater diversity of produce.
And it's not just the prepared or semi-prepared meals, even on produce, like my youngest daughter is going through a fruit phase. This morning she asked for blueberries. I was like, we don't have blueberries. You're gonna take the strawberries. But she loves cantaloupe.
Yep.
I don't buy just a cantaloupe because I don't have time to slice it every time she wants it. So I get it. That's already pre-sliced. And to your point around some of the micro markets, who is slicing and where are they slicing, and do they even have a license that allows for them to slice and package on site?
Absolutely. And that's a real opportunity, both for those grocers, but also for something like a central food processing facility that's doing some of that intermediate processing. It doesn't just, no one wants to cut a butternut squash, but a butternut squash is a nutrient dense, very affordable food in this time of year. So if we're looking at how do we get that into schools to make soup, but also into grocery stores to be selling for people to take home and cook,
Mhm.
or take any other vegetable that is challenging. Your melon is a great example. But I think that there are so many opportunities for us to be helping folks get the food that is ready to eat. We saw while I was at UDC, we piloted a veggie butcher that went to farmers markets and actually did that processing, having nutrition educators and students who were
Wait, what was it called? A veggie butcher?
yes.
That's awesome.
And so we would bring the UDC food truck and actually pop up with students who had Serve Safe licenses in a truck that was food safe, actually chopping and preparing people's food for them that they could then take home and cook. But it means that you don't have to have the highest quality knife or a spiralizer in your own house.
Yeah.
And we saw significant increases in the amount of fresh produce that was being purchased, because I might enjoy that vegetable, but not have any way to prepare it at home
Mhm.
or the time.
Yeah.
spend
Or it's just,
preparing
it seems daunting. Like the idea of like, oh, what do they call it? The squash spaghetti might seem
Yes.
great, but like, I don't know.
And the margins that are added if you're buying zoodles or squash, spiralized noodles at a store, it's at a much higher margin. And so if we can allow people to be having either those margins going to our smallest grocers or those margins staying in people's pockets, I think we would see a lot more of that fresh produce in those places actually moving.
Okay. This is good to hear. You kind of answered some of my questions. On the grocery store, but there is one more that I have. So, um, eh, when we have provided financial assistance for markets as opposed to restaurants, we've seen this happen with good food markets, or former good food. I don't even know. Do we call it former?
It's former.
Okay, former good food markets, which was in the Bellevue neighborhood in Ward 8. It we we put in a lot of money. We did a nice big grand opening in 2021, and a year later it closed, citing financial challenges related to inflation. And so, what would you say are lessons that we've learned from that particular um, situation that we can apply in future as we try to support, not the Safeway or the Giants, but other budding market businesses who want to move into some of these areas?
I think there's so much to learn from what happened with good food markets, and we are working with some of the other local philanthropists who also invested heavily into good food markets to really understand more about what happened despite a lot of community engagement, both in Bellevue and with good food markets, other locations. I think certainly some of the takeaways are making sure that we are good food markets saw huge sales in prepared foods, and they were in, we support grocers in places that are, good food markets was in a 300 plus apartment building,
Yeah.
directly next to district government buildings. So lots of people coming in for lunch, for things like that, and they did have a shared kitchen space that I think that was the first home of Kitchen Savages, which now has a new location in Anacostia. So was a first example of how a space like that could be popping up more food businesses. But realistically, I think that kind of idea of how we have combined kitchen space and grocery space is going to be an important part moving forward.
Mhm.
I think the other, another piece is really seeing more and more local businesses showcase there. Again, Good Food Markets had lots of local businesses and those sales were significant. And so really seeing that. And then last but not least, I think the way that we currently characterize a full service grocery store means they have to have 6 of these 7 key categories. They need to be directly percentaged in a way that I think we want to be as healthy as possible. And I think in reality, we're going to need to see grocery stores that may look different. And that might be those things that people want to buy immediately, as well as being able to get everything you need for that day or that week. And so I think preparing ourselves as a district for grocery stores that look different, that might operate differently, I think is one of the other lessons to take away from Good Food Markets. And then lastly, I think recognizing we expect with our businesses to be able to make an investment, a grant to a business, and then be done. To not provide technical assistance, to not provide ongoing support. Whereas with many of our other grants that the district provides, we may provide a nonprofit with a grant every year to run a program. And so I think I don't have an answer to that, but I think we're going to need to think differently about how we're supporting food businesses. And one thing I'm really excited about the Resilient Food System Infrastructure Grants, other funding that's coming from USDA, the Nourish DC process has been really combining investments with technical assistance. And that's something I think we're going to need to do more of moving forward.
Okay. That's good to hear that you've sort of done this kind of analysis and conversation. I hope that you're having these conversations with DEMPED as well. And to your point around it doesn't necessarily need to be a one size fit all process, right? Like when I think about how my husband used to shop when he lived alone and had no children versus how we shop now, it's very different. He never shopped like for a full week when he was a bachelor, right? He also lived above a grocery store. So he felt like, oh, well, if I need it, I'll just run downstairs. Where I was like, no, we need to plan out the meal for the week because I don't want to go back to the grocery store 5 and 6 times. But and I haven't met with a new DEMPED yet, but one of the things that even when I talk to like developers who work on grocery store projects, which I know we do very few, if any, standalone grocery store projects. As you said, it was sort of designed for the suburban area. But there are some areas of DC where it just doesn't make sense to me about how there isn't one. Fort Lincoln is an excellent example.
Right.
Costco is not a grocery store.
Right.
It is a wholesale retailer.
Right.
Some people don't need 5 gallons of milk at one time. They just need 1 gallon.
Right.
And Costco doesn't offer that. But how that shopping center, especially given the apartment buildings, the townhomes that are being built behind it, hasn't gotten something. It is actually perfectly fit, I think, for Trader Joe's over there, right next to the Chick-fil-A. If you're listening, Trader Joe's. There's a parking lot, there are people, all the things. But nonetheless, I want to encourage you as the food policy director to continue to do these types of collaborations and these direct conversations around what does food access look like beyond just the traditional Giant and Safeway, and how do we, because we got to make progress in 5, 7, and 8. And I know that, what is it going to be? Harris Teeter at McMillan is going to count, sure, in 5, but that eastern part of Ward 5, again, to them, Costco is not a grocery store.
Right.
It isn't, unless you want to buy 10 pounds of Cheerios at the same time. Not everybody has those many mouths in their home.
That's right. And I also think that, that also ties into food waste. If you're looking at how are we combining ways that we are educating people about how you can buy, how you preserve, and also allowing people to buy in smaller format of what you actually need for a week, I think, or whatever period of time you're shopping for, I think will be very valuable. And I will definitely take that both advice and idea of looking more into Fort Lincoln.
Great. So we have a hearing tomorrow on the Committee of the Whole on the Universal Free School Meals Bill that I introduced. And the Food Policy Council wrote a policy brief in support of universal school meals in FY23. Is that still your current position?
Yes.
Great. Check. You don't have to go further on down that line, because I'm sure we'll get into some of that stuff tomorrow. So I hope you submit that brief for the record for the Committee of the Whole to have available to them.
Will do.
You noted in your testimony about the number of community outreach events that you all have done in FY23, including Art All Night and DPR's Leader Garden. What were your takeaways from some of these events? And what would you say are some of the most common issues that are raised by residents?
Oh, I so appreciate that question because we really have invested time and energy, and it's my favorite part of this job is being able to hear directly from residents about what their concerns for food access are. I, of course, love talking about food business, and I was amazed that even when that was not the topic of conversation, there was so much desire for people to see more food businesses, but also the support for these really small business ideas to take root. And so really lots of people saying, you know, we want to see more kitchen space and we want to see more small food businesses in our neighborhood. Of course, people also continuously discuss the need for more grocery access. And so I do think that just what we were talking about comes up so often. I think some of the other things that were really interesting to hear from people are the importance of having a community garden distribute more than just the produce they grow. And Letterer Gardens is a great example of that. Letterer Gardens is very productive and they grow a lot of food, but it is amazing that they've been able to complement the food they grow with other food from the Capital Area Food Bank, with food from other community farms that are producing more abundantly, to be able to give people a really diverse set of produce. As you said, you want to be able to go somewhere, whether that is a food distribution point at a garden or a farmer's market or a small store, and be able to get a diversity of food, not just vegetables, but bread and cheese and eggs and other protein. And so really thinking about ways we do that, we hear a lot from people. And then I do think that lots of folks, you know, we in the Food Policy Council have used the term food apartheid areas as the way to describe places that are not an ecological condition of a food desert, but instead are driven by social and political and systemic racism. I have heard so much from community members that really identify as living in a food swamp. It's not a lack of calories. It is that they have access to. It is calorically dense food that is not nutritiously dense. And so really, again, you know, coming back to what's available at your corner store, if you can get a bag of chips for 99 cents and nothing else in the store, well, then that's what you're going to go for, especially if you're a young person coming home from school. And passing by wanting a quick snack. If we have other alternatives that are at that price point, people will consider them. But I was amazed to hear and excited to hear the diversity of what people wanted to hear. We did a lot of work in Nanny Helen Burroughs this year because that's where OP is focusing a small area plan, and really seeing that people want to see more spaces where they can get a smoothie or a salad at an affordable price point. And I think we do have the opportunity. We have spaces to be able to support that. And I also think recognizing that people don't just want smoothies and salad places. They also want bars and restaurants. The food system is not just healthy, nutritiously dense food. It's also places where we gather as a community. And so I think that having safe places to be in your neighborhood throughout the day and night is something people are really hungry for.
I think that is exactly right. A food swamp, which is a very interesting concept, but you're right. There are some parts where it's not that you don't have it. It's just your options available to you aren't great. Yeah. And I've always found that to be so interesting about just the United States sort of in general, how the cheapest items are the ones that are not the healthiest in order to eat. And then that's all that you have in certain communities. And then we wonder why there are diabetes or why there's, folks who are suffering with overweight and all of these other issues. And it's like, we've done the connection here. And yet, yeah, I can get a burger for 99 cents and the salad's going to cost me $12.99. And if I only have $20 to carry me through the week, I'm going to get the burger
Every time.
every time.
Yep.
To stretch it. So, yeah. Okay. Well, Director Howe, I want to thank you so much for this conversation. We have some things to follow up on. So we want to talk about licensing for not just shared kitchen, but also cottage food, how we would love to engage in a conversation with you all around some of the reforms that we can make there to make it easier for businesses or folks who want to start their own food businesses. I thought the concept of the veggie butcher is just so interesting and would love to like sort of engage. That was UDC, right? Of what that could do to sort of inspire more people to not fear a farmer's market because they don't have the quote unquote tools to be able to prepare the foods going further. And then a continuous conversation with DEMPET around some of these things, right? They, the Foods Policy Division of OP doesn't have all the grant funding, but you have the expertise. And so I think it's important for you all to bring that to bear in some of the conversations. The Food Policy Council report on the food system assessment showing that like 26.6% of Black households experience food insufficiency compared to 12.6% of Hispanic households and 1.9% of white households.
Yeah.
Like these numbers, there are people behind the numbers, but like what are we doing policy wise to change that paradigm, to change those numbers? So I want to thank you. I want to thank Mr. Morales earlier for agreeing to serve. Like I said, this is my PSA for anyone who is interested in serving on any of the boards and commissions, particularly those in the health cluster. Check out the Mayor's Office of Talent and Appointments website to see what is available. It is a great way, an excellent way to give back to the district, inform program and policy decisions. But this concludes today's roundtable. The Committee on Health will hold its next roundtable jointly with the Committee on Housing on Monday, December 4th at 10 a.m. This roundtable will focus on the challenges district residents have faced when enrolling in health and social benefits programs through DCAS, which is known as District Direct, which is a web-based application that is intended to streamline applications for certain public benefit programs available in the district. But even though we have spent over $600 million on this system, it does not appear to be working as intended. So we're going to hear testimony from representatives from the Department of Human Services as well as the Department of Healthcare Finance about that. The time is now 12:13 and this roundtable is adjourned. Thank you so much.